Hi guys. So Simon Coveney, the Irish Foreign Minister, spoke to Sophie Ridge about the current progress in the Brexit talks between the EU and the UK, and he wasn't very positive. So let's hear what he had to say.
Firstly, on the internal markets bill, so you're saying that if the UK government reimposes parts of the internal market bill, we're going to have no deal. That's it.
Well, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of EU capitals about this, and also EU commissioners, and I think there is an absolutely unanimous view that if the British government deliberately decides to break international law and undermine a treaty that's not even 12 months old, well, then why would the EU sign up to a new deal when the UK is breaking the existing one linked to Brexit? And I think, any logical person listening to that argument surely understands where the EU is coming from here. We have warned against this. The EU has said that it'll have to take legal action against the UK if they proceed with breaking international law and undermining the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is part of the Brexit withdrawal agreement. But having said that, I think we need to focus less on the legalities of these issues and more on actually resolving the outstanding issues. Because in my view, if we can resolve the outstanding issues linked to the protocol on Northern Ireland, if we can get a future relationship agreement in place, well then the issues that the government say they have, that they're dealing with the internal market bill, effectively disappear anyway.
So something I want to say about this. So these issues within the internal market bill that are a problem for Northern Ireland, I believe, there are two ways that Boris Johnson could deal with this, or may deal with this, I should say. Now, when it comes to the internal market bill, I think he's going to maintain it in respect to Scotland. But there's a possibility he could remove these problems within the internal market bill that are in conflict with the withdrawal agreement and therefore in conflict with the Good Friday Agreement. And therefore a problem for Boris Johnson to get a free trade agreement, a free trade deal with the United States later on, because they have said, look, if this undermines the Good Friday Agreement, you're not getting a trade deal. So there are two ways that Boris Johnson, he could remove them at the last minute, say to the European Union, look, these are gone, I'm not going to implement them. The internal market bill is still in the process of being ratified in Parliament, but what I'll do is I'll remove them. And please trust me. The alternative is that he doesn't remove them, but they are removed next year. Now, there's a possibility that Boris Johnson could be removed from power next year because of the disaster of Brexit. And what could happen is that Boris Johnson's replacement could remove these aspects of the internal market bill in order, perhaps next year, to facilitate some sort of agreements with the European Union. So Boris Johnson may not get a deal, but next year, when the UK starts to renegotiate with the European Union, so this is something I've talked about before on this channel. Brexiteers don't seem to understand this, that even if Boris Johnson leaves without a deal, the day after, his team will be back in Brussels negotiating for individual agreements. Brexiteers seem to think that the relationship with the EU is going to end completely on the 1st of January next year. No, that's not going to be the case. Boris Johnson may not get a trade deal, but he will still have to negotiate with the European Union later on. Negotiations with the European Union are probably going to go on pretty much forever. It's just that what we're focusing on here is the trade deal. Now, Boris Johnson may be removed, as I said, next year because of Brexit. It will be a disaster. He's already under a lot of pressure at the moment. And perhaps the idea that somebody else could be influencing him at the moment and not Dominic Cummings could point in the direction that Boris Johnson may actually sign up to something at the last minute. Now, some people following this disagree with me. They're fully on board with the idea that Boris Johnson is not going to get a deal. It's too late now. I still feel, my gut is telling me that Boris Johnson will sign something at the last minute. I've seen reports about how the UK has compromised on a number of things. So why compromise on something if you're going to walk away anyway? You just compromise on nothing and just walk away. That's my gut feeling, is that Boris Johnson will agree to something. Now, I could be wrong. I'm not an expert on this, but I just have this feeling that Boris wants to protect his position. He's thrown out Dominic Cummings, someone who would have been pushing him to go down the road of a no deal. And now with Dominic Cummings out of the picture, I think the voices around him will tell him, look, sign up to something because you want to remain Prime Minister. If you get something, you can push it through Parliament. You can even ask the opposition to support you. And you can sideline the hardline Brexiteers. It would be extremely damaging to you in Parliament, but in the long term, it would be beneficial.
So let's focus on resolving the outstanding issues.
Well, let's talk about one of those other...
The internal market bill may not be the issue that it is now.
Well, let's talk about resolving some of the other outstanding issues that you mentioned as well. Fishing, as you say, a very emotive issue for many people.
Which is so ridiculous, okay? The fishing industry. The fishing industry, as someone, and I don't remember who it was on this channel, they wrote it in the comment section and I thank them immensely for it. They compared it's about the same size as the lawnmower industry in the UK. So this fishing industry, the support for the fishing industry is being used as a political tool, as a bargaining chip against the European Union. You know, Brexiteers seem to think it's important. It's not actually important. Once again, it's about as valuable as the lawnmower industry. I said before on this channel, there are many bigger industries that are not being protected, not getting the political noise that they deserve. But the fishing industry, yes.
A report in the Sunday Times saying that Britain wants to reserve at least half of the fish in British waters for UK boats. The EU says it should be less than 20%. I mean, it feels like, if that's true, the two sides are an awfully long way away. Are you comfortable risking a no deal and all that it entails to keep French fishermen happy?
Now, Coveney says something very, very intelligent here, something that Brexiteers probably have never heard from the likes of Boris Johnson or his government.
Well, this isn't about French fishermen. I can assure you it's about Irish fishermen and Dutch fishermen and Danish fishermen and Portuguese fishermen. You know, it's about EU fishing interests on one side and British fishing interests on the other. And the truth is that the two sides are very far apart in terms of the expectations on the British side and the negotiating mandate that Michel Barnier has on the EU side.
The deal could fall down on fishing. That's correct to say that, then?
It could. It could. I certainly hope that won't be the case. It'll be extraordinary if it does. But I think that is possible. And, you know, if the UK side takes an approach of let's get everything else agreed and then let's say to the EU, surely we're not going to allow this to collapse on fishing, so give us what we want on fishing, that is a negotiating tactic that won't work. Like everything here, there's a middle ground position that's needed. And the EU argument on this is... So the EU
should move as well on fishing, you think?
Sorry, the EU has already moved on fishing from its position of trying to hold the status quo, but it hasn't moved enough for the UK to be happy. But the way in which the EU see fish, because it's important that British listeners understand this, you know, the UK is looking for facilitation from the EU in many, many areas. Take the energy market, for example. The UK wants to access the EU energy market. And the EU says, well, that's fine, we can try to facilitate that, but we want access to British fishing grounds as well. This is about give and take. And these fish fish don't hold passports. You know, if you take mackerel, for example, which is a big stock that's under discussion here, most of the mackerel caught in Scottish waters are born off the west coast of Ireland, they mature off the northwest coast of Ireland, and then they swim as adults into Scottish waters where they're caught by both EU fleets and British fleets.
Finally, somebody says this. Somebody explains that these issues are not as simple. They're not black and white issues. They're not simply, oh, well, we want our fish and you can have your fish. As he said, the fish don't have passports. They don't decide, I'm going to be Irish fish and you're going to be Scottish fish or you're going to be English fish. It's, once again, Brexiteers don't understand the complexities here. So in a sense, the European Union say, okay, well, we're going to maintain, environmental controls or whatever in Ireland. The fish, develop in Ireland, and then they swim to Scotland, and then they're caught in Scotland. So the European Union, in a sense, is compensating, subsidizing the Scottish fishing industry. I'm just using this as an example. Do they not understand the complexities here? They think we have our fish and they have their fish. It's not like that. The ocean is not, there aren't borders in the ocean. As he said, they don't have passports. You're allowed to come in here. No, you're not allowed to come in here. Unfortunately, Brexit was sold as something very simple. And once again, and I've talked about this before, out means out. Brexit means Brexit. People didn't understand what Brexit was. They were told everything was going to be simple. They were told we hold all the cards. They were told that we can have our cake and eat it too. And as soon as you start to actually dig a bit deeper, you realize it's much more complex than that. Finally, somebody is telling the Brexiteers to their faces that it's much more difficult than you imagine. Now, once again, I'll just go back to the main point here. I think Boris Johnson is going to get a deal because he needs a deal. I think he's going to sign up to something. I hope he is. But once again, as I said before, if Boris Johnson doesn't get a deal and the UK crashes out without a deal in January, the UK will be back in Brussels the day after negotiating individual agreements. And it'll be much more difficult at that stage. It will take much more time and it will be much more expensive. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.